Regina, thank you for this invitation to be here. And thank you all for coming. Who here is a member of the Pennsylvania Prison Society? Thank you. Well, I hope that for many of you after this evening, you'll go to our website and consider joining your fellow audience members at becoming members of the Pennsylvania Prison Society. Since 1787, the Pennsylvania Prison Society has worked to ensure humane prison conditions and advocate for sensible criminal justice policies. 230 years later, in the age of mass incarceration, our mission is more relevant now than ever. The Society is the oldest organization in the country dedicated to sensible and humane criminal justice. Today, the Society advocates for systemic policy change, responds to the concerns of inmates and their families, and provides a subsidized bus service for Philadelphia families visiting loved ones incarcerated in different parts of the state. And we provide assistance to some individuals returning home from state incarceration. The cornerstone of the Society's work is a network of volunteers, known as official visitors, who visit prisoners throughout Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania law authorizes the Prison Society to designate volunteers to visit any prison or jail in the Commonwealth. Prison Society volunteers have the authority to meet with any inmate in any prison, county, or state in the Commonwealth. For the 80,000 Pennsylvanians behind bars on any given day, our volunteers are the only measure of transparency. Often, our volunteers become the inmate's only contact, regular contact, with someone outside their facility, and frequently they serve as a bridge for inmates and their families. Today's film came about because of such of a bridge. It is our official visitors, our volunteers, who provide a bridge for the Lifers Association and the many outside groups and individuals who wish to support them. It is a real privilege to lead an organization of people with such caring, such heart, and such dedication. I actually, just before coming here, received an email from the daughter of one of our volunteers informing me that her mother had just turned 100, and that the day before her 100th birthday, she went to Graterford to meet with inmates. So the film that you're about to see comes about in part because of the heart and dedication of some of our volunteers. It is a privilege to be here and to introduce this film.
Commutation is show of mercy and compassion. And you always hope that you always receive mercy from those in our society.
Well, from the start of my career, commutation was the primary avenue for life sentence prisoners or long-term offenders to get some sort of relief.
There is no get out of jail free card except in a Monopoly game. In the real world, commutation, it's a very difficult process for every single inmate.
Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania and many other states, governors are extremely reluctant to use their commutation powers.
Commutation means everything to a man or woman who's serving life in prison because life without parole is actually a death sentence. People are sentenced there for the rest of their lives, and I think that we all as human beings strive on having hope for our future. And sometimes the situation for lifers can be very hopeless, but we always keep a little hope that one day that we can file for commutation and be awarded clemency by the governor of the state.
Being that it is the power of the governor, it is a very political process. Whether they want to take a risk in giving a mercy to someone who could possibly go back in society and reoffend. Governor Milton Schaap, during his administration, he commuted over 230 life sentences with a population that was just a little over 600. So he basically released close to half of the life sentence prisoners. And now we have 5,000 lifers in the state of Pennsylvania, with little hope that commutations will be forthcoming.
People can reform. People can change. Giving someone a sentence of life without parole implies that they're the same person, and I don't think that's true. And I don't think I'm alone in society in thinking that. I think some people can and do change, and it may take a number of years for that change process. I think for some inmates, we need to have an avenue for them to demonstrate that they are indeed someone who deserves a second chance.
The circumstances vary, and we really need to have a system where every case can be looked at case by case and make a determination based on one's culpability, actions in the crime, his maturation at the time, what he's done since he's been incarcerated. Take all of that into consideration and see if one can be released back into the community and pose no threat to the society. Right now, we just broad brush everybody as dangerous no matter what the circumstances are, and that's not just at all.
It's interesting with the whole run-up in mass incarceration, how little research we've done on what victims really want. And when we do research on that, we find that victims are not necessarily looking for more prosecution, more punishment. In some cases, they've been injured, they want healthcare support. In some cases, they want to be relocated. In some cases, they need counseling. But because we've emphasized that victims want vengeance and that they will get closure, that's the popular narrative that we have, and that we in fact find that they don't necessarily get more closure from more punishment.
Well, I think service is one means of giving back. One of my heroes in life was a guy named Albert Schweitzer. He talked about the best thing you can be in life is a servant. He meant people who provide genuine service to others. And I think that's what some of the good lifers do in the prison. That's what helps. They actually provide service.
One way that lifers make the situation in prisons better is through the work that they do, through educating themselves, by creating programs, by encouraging other men and women who are inside the prison with them to really look beyond themselves. And so they create, a lot of times they create these programs that are directed at helping not only the community outside the wall, but also help the community inside the wall. Because we recognize that that is our community. Without the possibility of getting out one day, we realize that we have to live there, and we try to make it better for everyone involved. But more specifically, we have families. We have children, we have wives, we have parents, and we want people to go back home and be an asset to the community instead of a liability.
It was the lifers who provided me with opportunities for rehabilitation. Religious communities, they're mostly led by lifers, inmates. The school, it was lifers who got me involved in that, helped me to see that I needed to improve myself academically, that I could make a contribution. It was lifers who helped men in the law clinics. And the possibility of commutation gives more reason for those lifers to continue that effort, because it may be rewarded with freedom. I think a person who is seeking mercy must first of all look at the victim and be sincere and be remorseful and take responsibility for that act and acknowledge that it was wrong. Secondly, to tell that victim that I'm sorry. You can't bring that person back. You can't repay for the loss of a loved one. But if I can do something for my community that maybe help another person.
The way a person shows that they are deserving of mercy and compassion is by, really just recognizing, what they did and the impact that it had on not only the victim and their family, but their own family and themselves and the community as a whole. I think once a person can demonstrate that, and there are a number of ways to do that, to redeem yourself by really showing compassion towards other people and giving back to one's community.
Our experiences make us who we are, and I think I'm better. I'm old, but I'm better. That whole experience has prepared me to be a community person, a positive community person. I'm the block captain on my block. That's probably one of my proudest jobs, to have young kids come up to you and give you respect, not because you demand it, because that's how they see you.
I know that in my heart that I would never make that same mistake. I know that because I made a bad decision one time and it cost me 38 years incarceration. So I know I'm not going to do it again. So if I'm out there teaching my children, my grandchildren, my nieces and nephews those things, and it's as an example, I think they all do. And the gentlemen that I've been around, they're a good example.
People who have served life sentences and then had their sentences commuted have very, very low recidivism rates because they age out of crime. And often we're not commuting them unless they have support systems and families and things in place when they get out. So if you're keeping people inside just to reduce crime, it makes no sense to keep the lifers in.
Commutation is not a full pardon. Commutation means to commute the sentence of life to another sentence, 16 to life. So I'm still a lifer. I'm on lifetime parole. I have successfully completed 23 years on parole, and my parole will continue to the day I die.
Every lifer that gets out on commutation, and it's not many, but we all know that one of the first principles of a commuter life is to do no harm, and to represent the men and women in prison, so that when people see me, they will know what a lifer looks like. You know, a lot of time I go give talks, I start the talk off by saying, my name is Tyrone Works, I'm a lifer, because I'm still serving life without parole. And I really want people in society to realize that just because one is labeled as a lifer or someone who participated in a murder, that is not the end of their life. That is not all they are.
Denying people the opportunity of parole denies them their dignity, denies them that people change, it denies them their lives, and it tells them that every day that we will punish you and that you haven't changed and that we as a society will not forgive you. It doesn't help the society, it doesn't reduce crime in any significant way. It's a just unending, mean-spirited punishment.
What I remember vividly was the day that I was going home. When I came out into the hallway, there were a number of lifers in the hallway to wish me well. And I was hugging them and I was crying like a baby as I walked down the hallway, because I grew up with these guys inside, and I had this great opportunity to go home and be with my family and to be free. And as I looked in each of their eyes, I knew intimately that they were all going to die there unless something changed. Men that were smart, who were generous, who recognized and were very remorseful about the activity of their young lives, who could be a very powerful asset to society. And yet, here they were, older men who would possibly die there if nothing didn't change.
If you have any comments about the film, I'd be more than happy to receive them. You can reach me via email at the law school. On the back of the program, There are some websites that would be of interest to you. There is the website that lifers have set up to support the Parole Eligibility Education Initiative. There's a Facebook page, and then there is a change.org petition, and we would ask if you are interested that you go to that and support us. The white paper that the Lifers Organization has produced in support of the initiative is available on the website, and we also have copies which you can pick up. This video will be very shortly on the Lifers website. It will also be on the website of the Penn Program on Documentaries and the Law. The link is there. You can also find there the video that was done by the students on compassionate release in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to introduce our panelists. Their bios are set forth in the program. I will say that Steve and Tyrone should look familiar to you as they are in the video, and I think they did an excellent job of representing the lifers. We relied on commuted lifers. That meant that it was not possible for us to include some other folks that we would like to have had represented, namely the women lifers and some of the Latino lifers. But we wanted to have women's voices represented to some extent on the panel. And so Ellen Melquiando consented to being a panelist. So without further ado, let's see if we can get a conversation started about the Lifers Parole Eligibility Education Initiative and what we can do to help foster it. We couldn't have done this without the lifers at Graterford. And they are the one group that can't be here. The same is true for Charles Larson, who produced the wonderful fine art images that were included in the video. The Lifers Organization is extraordinary, and we have represented on the panel 2 ex-presidents of the Lifers Organization. So I thought that it would be a good way to start the program by asking them to tell us something about Lifers Incorporated and how it is that the Lifers, even though they are confined in a maximum security prison, are able to have an impact on the life of the prison in general, on communities outside, as well as a desire to have an impact on the politics of corrections and the politics of criminal justice.
Okay, I'll start because I'm the oldest. Lifers Incorporated was founded basically on the premise of fighting for parole eligibility legislatively for lifers. And we have somebody in the audience here, Wayne Jacobs, who back in 19... Yeah, how about that? I think it was 1979 or 80. He was a former inmate who was out on the street. He was a legislative aide to State Representative Andrew Corn, and he helped fashion the first parole eligibility for lifers bill that was introduced in Pennsylvania State Legislature. I think it was in '82 or something like that. And so he's here tonight, and I mean, it was that long ago, and we're still in this fight. So that was the premise for establishing the organization, but it expanded over the years to, because we understood that it was going to be a long fight for legislative action, and that the only opportunity we really had for lifers was through commutation. So commutation is such a rigorous process that it's very difficult for a person in jail to demonstrate that they are worthy in that environment. I mean, what can you do in the prison? I mean, there's limited opportunities for volunteerism or to really make an impact on the community. So that was our other mission, was to establish ways in which the men and women in the prisons can demonstrate their humanity through service. And over the years, we sponsored various programs. We brought cultural and educational programs inside the prison. There's a story I tell. We did we used to do a fundraiser for a organization called SCAN, Supported Child and Adult Network. And it's a funny thing, because when I came home, the executive director remembered the work we did and gave me a job. You know, so that worked out well. You know, so, but that was the mission of life. That's how we basically got started. And then I had my commutation here in '88, and certain things had transpired, and I told Tyrone. In fact, what happened was, Tyrone and I were involved in a rescue. There was an attempted rape on one of the teachers in the school. And Tyrone and I were part of the group of inmates who basically rescued her. So right after that incident, I told Tyrone, I said, "You can be the president now." I'm out. And, you know, I just had that feeling that that was the last piece on my resume. That should get me out of here. And, although at the time it was a long shot, because I only had like 14 years in. The common knowledge was you had to have at least 20 years served before you can even be considered. But we had Governor Casey in office. He was a Democrat. Everybody knows Republicans are not going to give you anything. So my strategy was, I'm going to apply in Casey's first term, because I know I'm going to get denied, as is the practice, and then before he leaves, I will apply again, and maybe as he's going out the door, and if he doesn't have any more political aspirations, he might grant me. And praise be to God, he granted me on the first shot, you know. So I had 14 in at the time, and he commuted me to 16 to life. And that is a miracle. And I know you heard the stories. Tyrone did 38. They have recently been letting out a few juvenile lifers, and they established 35 years as the benchmark. And we went to a hearing last week, and a young man had 42 years in, and they said, well, we're going to give him 2 more, because I don't know what can he show him in 2 more years, but I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of momentum, and hopefully we can get something going with a bill. Was at 135 that the State Representative Jason Dawkins. Very strong, powerful young legislator in Harrisburg.
First of all, thanks a lot for coming out and having me here, and I want to thank Ms. Austin for working with the Lifers Inside and really putting together this film, and acknowledge everyone that really played a role in it, because I thought it was very, very well done. Yeah, Steve is right. Like I was a member of Lifers Incorporated under his leadership as president, And then when he went home, I became president of Lifers Incorporated. And obviously, Steve was a great leader, a great mentor, a great someone to really look up to. I mean, he mentored so many young men inside of the institution. He actually mentored me, prepared me to take over leadership of the organization. And like you said, we always try to make it clear that the very putting together of Lifers Incorporated was based on the premise that lifers deserve the opportunity for parole. And so we were a political organization. That was our first piece of putting the organization together. It was political. It was to fight a political process that will get a bill passed so that every lifer in the state of Pennsylvania will have a process where they can be looked at individually and eventually make it home on parole. And after Steve left, and Steve did a good job with the social aspect of our organization, I took that piece and kind of expanded it. Simply kind of the fact that I met with this, and a lot of people don't know this story. I met with a legislator because I was there, and Steve was there, when we were there at the height of the war on drugs and the war on crime and the advent of mass incarceration. And so this legislator came in to meet with certain guys in the population because he was visiting various prisons to look at what was the impact of what was the impact on the population of the increase of more people coming in. And so I was one of the people on the list to go talk to him. So I went down and sat down and talked to him, and he was asking me what were some of the impacts, and I told him, and all I talked about was lifers. And he said, whoa, I'm not here to talk about life. I'm here to talk about what is the impact of rise in population rates. And I kept talking about lifers. And so he said, can we talk off the record? So I said, absolutely. And so he told his staff not to take it. He said, look, I looked at all the data. He said, and you guys are right. Y'all deserve an opportunity to get on the parole. You got the lowest recidivism rate. You are a great management tool for the Department of Corrections. A lot of you have grown up, you aged out of crime. He said, I looked at all the data. He said, but I'm not the one to say that. He said, I do not have the gravitas. I do not have the political strength to say that publicly. He said, because my opponent will run against me and say I'm soft on crime, right? He said, what y'all really need to do is do public education. You got to change your image. And so I took that. And because he said, one of the things he did say, he was very honest in his off-the-record conversation. He said that I got 2 daughters to put through college. He said, I can't say it because my opponent will say I'm soft on crime. And so that should give you pause right there. He couldn't do the morally right thing because he was worried about his own political career. And so we tried to expand the work that we did in terms of service and out in the community to really change our image, because I really took what he said to heart. And Kevin Mimes, who is now the president, is doing a very good job while working with Regina Austin and putting this film together. This is all part of telling the stories of lifers. And it is a well-run organization. It gives men activities, ways to give back to the community, ways to redeem themselves, ways to be active in the community and find a piece of hope, And I know that it served me well in my tenure as president, and the men underneath that were part of the organization were really, really good guys that I miss. As I said in the film, I cried like a baby the day I was released because we had all grew up together. And I always tell people that me and Steve was together every day, down to school, working, running projects, doing things. We worked for PLP, we tutored people, guys inside. And the day he went home, I was depressed. I was really depressed because it's almost losing a family member. We was there together so long. And so, yes.
Ellen, do you want to give us maybe an idea of what's happening in the women's facilities?
Well, I certainly would like to say all the wonderful things that the PLA at Muncie and Cambridge Springs are doing, but there is no Women's Lifers program or organization at either prison because the institution won't allow it. They are supposed to be perfectly content with their general inmate organization, so the women do not have the opportunity to organize like the men can. So I am sort of sitting here sort of fuming that there weren't any women in that movie, but you can't win them all. So in terms of, I guess, just organizing in terms of an organization within the lifers population, it's done very informally in small groups with counselors, or they try to finagle their agenda into an MIO organizational meeting, but it's very frustrating, to say the least.
The last woman commuted, or the last two women commuted, were commuted before in 1995. There have been no women since then, and the women who were commuted are not active.
No, they disappear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's why
they wouldn't do this. Women have art. It's a very traumatic situation. It's these women they suffer. They really do, and they don't want to be out in the public. But I did attend a public hearing for a woman lifer just a couple of weeks ago in Harrisburg. She got all 5 votes. So we're just waiting for Governor Wolf to sign her convocation. Tina Brocious out of Dauphin County.
One of the things that the film does is to emphasize the economics of keeping people who are older, have served for decades, incarcerated at a time when they might still be productive members of society, but they're facing the prospect of aging in prison, and prison ages you faster than the society on the outside side does. But the question then is, might we lose if the concern is cutting the budget and it is not accompanied by an effort to address the problems of mass incarceration? The DOC budget is large, but is there enough fat in the budget such that this is an argument that will produce the result that we want, rather than cutbacks in services or cutbacks with regard to funding reentry?
With that. I think Tyrone will attest to this. With the increase in the budget, there has not been increase in programming. In fact, there's been cutbacks in programming.
And food.
And food. And there's been increase in construction of new prisons. When I first fell, I think it was 7 prisons statewide. Now it's about 30, and all of them filled to capacity. Double selling is, the course of the day. So just cutting the budget, I'm quite sure there's a lot of factors. Like I said, that money didn't translate into more programming. But I think we need to look at corrections, the whole issue of mass incarceration. I think we have to go back to the ideal of rehabilitation. We left that. They forgot about that. Now it's just warehousing and retribution. I think I mentioned in the film that even the victims, they don't feel satisfied just because a man does 20 more years or 30 more years. That doesn't make their life home. That doesn't bring their loved one back. And we are losing out, that we are wasting humanity, men and women who could be an asset, sometimes you learn the hard way. That's, I think everybody in here has something on their history that they're glad nobody knows about. But I'm saying we change, we all grow, most of us anyway. And if we don't take another look on how as a nation, we treat our citizens. I think, who's the philosopher said he want to know about the civilization, look at how they treat their prisoners. You know, so I think that's where we need to overhaul the whole system. But, you know, that's an ideal, and that's down the road. We could start off with this parole eligibility for lifers, and see where that takes us. But just cutting the money, I don't know how you can do that and still keep this monster machine, this prison industrial complex. That's what it is, because it's a money generator. It's probably one of the biggest employers, you know. So all those small towns in Pennsylvania that used to have industry, the coal mines and the steel mills, when they went down, they built a prison right there. So I mean, this is what we're looking at. So that whole industrial prison complex has, it'll be a hard thing to dismantle at this point. Yeah. So we need to look at this whole thing, and the economics, you know, becomes a big part. You know, as we create more industry and jobs and economic development, that can translate into less incarceration, because whether people want to admit it or not, most crime is based on economics, poverty. You know, I mean, you got a couple of rich people out there doing stuff, but you know, they don't get arrested. It's the poor guy that gets locked up. I mean, that's the reality of the thing.
Do are women's positions in the prison system in Pennsylvania the same or different? Are there disparities in the way in which women are treated that economics could play a role in eliminating?
I mean, where do you begin? You know, Muncie is a very old facility. You know, it was built in, I don't know, 1920 or something. It's deplorable. It's an awful facility. It's decrepit. It's old. It's mind-boggling. I don't even know where to begin, but, you know, and then you look at Cambridge Springs, which used to be a college that they converted into a prison, you know, and that right there says something too. But when you were talking about the horrors of double selling, you know, you go to Cambridge Springs and there's 6 women in one dorm room, which was meant for 2 students. So now you've got 3 sets of bunk beds in one room, and so 2 wouldn't be so bad for them. But no, I'm of the feeling that, you know, they don't spend enough money on the prisoners, on the women or on the men. I think the budget, to really do the job right, it should be 3 times higher, frankly. It's never going to happen. They do a crappy job. You know, there's nothing positive about it. I don't know where to begin. It's you know, when I go to visit the women, you know, they dress like men. You know, the facility is designed for men. So they want to, you know, de-emphasize or you know, oppress any sense of femininity or feminine power. So it's a struggle right there just to maintain that kind of identity in any kind of, you know, capacity building or whatever. So they're very oppressed. You can't become more oppressed, I don't think, than visiting the women in prison in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, no, actually, it's horrible the way they treat the women. You know, you say something very astute. The fact that the women wear the same thing. I mean, well, in their tailor shops, they make all the clothes, the uniforms that we wear, and the boots, and they're built on men's cut because the largest population of men, and the women wear the same thing. I don't know how the women wear them boots. You know, so, and they have, and because they're out the middle of the state, where Graterford and Pittsburgh and some of the male facilities are close to urban areas, the women facilities are out in the middle of nowhere, and so they don't get the same resources or the same
Tension.
that, a lot of the men facilities do, so. And we always try to acknowledge the women. I knew a number of women, Marie Scott, and the woman that died.
Sharon Wiggins.
Sharon Wiggins, so, yeah.
Yeah, Sharon is really why I'm here. She should be sitting here.
Yeah.
For sure. But even if she didn't die, she would still be
And she was
waiting,
juvenile-
waiting.
and she was a juvenile.
Right. But she would still be waiting to be resentenced because she's from Dauphin County,
Right.
and nobody's been resentenced yet in Dauphin County. Her co-defendant is 17. He hasn't been resentenced yet, so she would still be waiting in prison. Yes,
right,
she wouldn't be out yet. But Marie Scott has filed for commutation. It's been officially filed at the Board of Pardons, so she's excited about that.
One of the concerns that is expressed in the video and is generally expressed is that our politicians are loath to agree to commutations because they fear that someone who is released will commit more crimes, and that will end the political life of the person who agrees to the commutation. Pennsylvania has a Willie Horton by the name of Reginald McFadden. He went out and after being involved in I think it was a hostage situation with a corrections officer, or there was a prison riot, and so he was commuted, and he was allowed to go to New York, where he killed 2 more people and raped and robbed a 3rd person. As a result, the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania was amended to require the unanimous vote of the Board of Pardons for executive commutations. If you had a chance to speak to the governor, what would you say to the governor in terms of the courage, or to bolster the courage of the governor to commute sentences?
Well, I would tell them no woman commuted ever reoffended. So, no, you got to look at that. And, if you look at a comment that Dr. Burke said to me in an email a couple of years ago, he's the head of the statistics department here. He's a statistician. He's the mastermind of the assessment tool, the evil mastermind of the assessment tool, I think, the algorithm. But anyway, so he said that I asked him, do you have any data about women who are convicted of a violent crime and who have served decades in prison? What is their recidivism rate or possibility? And he said, I have no data on that population, but common sense will tell you they are at low risk of recidivism. So that's what I would tell the governor.
Well, I would tell the governor a similar story, that if he looked at since 1941, over 600 men and women have been commuted. And during that time, the recidivism rate for commuted lifers is less than 1%, right? And that tells a story that is vastly different from people just on parole. I think they say the recidivism is close to 66%, and which makes lifers the best risk for successful. Best what I'm trying to say. The best risk for returning back to the community, as opposed to people who commit the other crime. And the fact that most lifers, you look at the lifers that have in the community, look at what they've done, like what Steve has done, what Esan has done, with other community lifers that have done over the years in terms of adding to society instead of being a liability. I think that would bode well in giving him some political courage, if not moral courage, to step forward and take a strong look at lifers when they apply for commutation.
And I think the issue with Reginald McFadden goes to show that there is a need for a process. Reggie was able to circumvent the process. through his cooperation with the Department of Corrections and getting the guys who were involved in the riot in Camp Hill to identify them and get them convicted, and that was his reward.
And other institutions.
Yeah. Anybody that knew Reginald in Graterford wouldn't let him in their house, wouldn't let him in their cell. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. You know, so that process was circumvented, and so it goes to show those in power, you know, they can make mistakes too. That was a mistake. Everybody knew it in the prison. You know, when he got out.
I mean, even the guys inside knew that this guy was weird and something was wrong with him. And they did, and like we say, it's a political process. The very fact that Reginald Fact got out was politics.
Yeah.
They were rewarding him for telling on people who were involved in riots, and he got transferred to different institutions, and he was feeding them information about what was going on. And without any merit, they made the determination to release him based on his value to them, and it came back to bite them in the butt. You know what I mean? And so in 1995, when that happened, it changed the political race. I mean, Single was
Mark Single,
10, 15 points up in the polls. He was going to win the election to follow Casey. And as soon as that story broke in New York, he dropped in the polls, and Ridge came up. And the first thing Ridge did was hold a special session on crime, and he changed everything. And like right now, although Steve and I both are still lifers, he's life on parole, I'm life on parole, we are different. Steve got commuted pre-95, and so he falls under the parole board. So if Steve does something wrong or somebody make a claim and he gets arrested, he's just gonna be treated like any other parolee. If I get arrested for something or somebody make a claim against me, I can get my life sentence back. You know what I mean? So in 1995, they changed the Constitution. They took it from a majority vote where you have 5 people that sits on the board. The lieutenant governor, who's the chairperson, the attorney general, there's 2 elected officials, and then you got
criminologist.
Yeah, a psychologist, a correction expert, and a crime victim. Those are the 5 people. Prior to 1995, it was a majority vote, where if the 3 people who are appointees could make a determination, and if the 2 elected officials felt like it was a political risk, they didn't have to vote, you could still get to the governor. Well, because of Reginald Fadden and Tom Ridge had the special session on crime, they changed the Constitution and they made it unanimous. That just made it impossible to navigate that process. Now, I was blessed, and me and a couple other guys were blessed to be able to navigate that process to get a unanimous vote, but it didn't really, there was a dark cloud over Pennsylvania because of Reginald McFadden, because of Tom Ridge, and because of the change in the Constitution. And Steve is right. Because it's such a political process, we need a process that's outside of the political realm so people can make correction decisions about who could be transitioned back into the community with no threat to public safety.
And I think also Marie Scott reminded me today that the victims only know about the perpetrator, at that moment in time, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they may not have ever seen or interacted with the lifer since that day. So 30, 40 years later, or 50 years, in their head, they haven't grown, they haven't changed. And I think I would tell the governor, you have to have some kind of dialogue. You have to have some kind of process where if anybody's opposing the commutation, then, I think there needs to be some kind of communication between the affected, the victim, family or whatever, and the lifer who is seeking commutation. I don't think they should meet, or they don't actually meet at a public hearing, but, if that's their only time to say publicly their opposition, that's not fair to them. They need more than just that that one moment in time to speak publicly about their thoughts about the commutation. So if it was a little bit more holistic, there wouldn't be so much mystery or insecurity.
And I tell you, it always amazed me that women, statistics for women, they haven't been granted commutation, and in most of the cases that it was abuse things involved. Statistics will tell you that most of women offenders that commit murder, it was after periods of domestic violence and things like that, and for them not to be considered. I mean, that statistic, you said there's no data on women because they didn't let anybody out.
No data.
No data.
No data.
And you would think it'd be a little more mercy towards the females, but
I think there should be a separate commutation, board just for women. I think there should be a whole separate court system just for women. There needs to be trauma experts on these boards, and there aren't any.
You have an audience of people who are interested in the possibility of supporting the Lifers' effort to increase commutations and perhaps support legislation. What would you have the audience do leaving from here if you could channel what the Lifers would want to ask of the audience? What would you say?
I would say, how many folks in your family have gotten in trouble? Just think in your own home. What kind of treatment would you prefer for someone in your family, whether it's a nephew, a niece, son, daughter, should they be involved in a crime in which somebody lost their life? And the other piece is, we tend to think that lifers are the only group of offenders that have committed murder. Other offenders have committed murder but have not become lifers because the way they manipulate the court system, they were able to evade the life sentence. Most people, the courts almost make you plea bargain. They don't want to, especially for poor offenders, they don't have the money for good lawyers, so they want you to plea bargain. So, I mean, you can, a lot of cases where it may on surface look like a first-degree case, but they plea bargain down. And if you have good lawyers and things like that, you can avoid that life sentence. So it's not as if all lifers they're the only person that committed a murder. Okay, there's probably more folks walking the street every day who have been perpetrators of a crime in which somebody has lost their life. So, yeah, but once you get the label, you're the worst of the worst, And then the way our criminal justice system works is that this adversarial system. Are we looking for justice or are we looking for convictions? And I think almost every successful politician has been a lawyer, has been working with the district attorney office, and then they go into private practice and they run for office. So that is the mechanism towards political success through the courts, and on the backs of mostly poor people and minorities. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I'm sure, based on this audience, that we don't have to convince you of anything. You're already supporters of it.
That's why you're here, right?
That's why you're here. But what can you do as a person that supports the notion of ending LWOP and death by incarceration is, you got to talk to people. It's all about public education and making people aware, right? And if you have an opportunity, go in, meet with the lifers, go in and meet with people who are, we really, the fact of the matter is we really need the people who oppose life without parole, who supports the prison industrial complex, who supports life without parole, because they do that in the absence of really knowing what that really means. You know what I mean? Because they get their frame from politicians, movies, TV, and those kind of things. And so I would invite anyone that knows someone who is anti parole for lifers to talk to them, take them in prison, get them to sign petitions, talk to your legislator, and just continue this education so that it goes further than just this room. Because this film is definitely going to help because it's going to tell their story. And you can always call on Steve and I, and now with all the juvenile lifers, there are a lot of men who are serving life. And I always told people that it's less about the crime than it is about the label. And the juvenile lifers kind of supports that thing, that whole concept. Because prior to the Supreme Court ruling that it's unjust to give a minor mandatory life without parole sentence, they were the worst human beings in the world. They were psychopaths, incorrigible, threat to public safety. And then somebody says, oh, that's illegal. Oh, okay, let's just resentence them, send them all back out in the community. So it's not the crime as much as it is the label. When people say lifer, the image that's conjured in his mind is this horrible person. Somebody like I was one, Steve was one. It just took a signature to change who we are, you know. And now we upstanding, citizens.
There you go.
But so we really got to tell the life of story that as age goes up, crime goes down, and that a lot of men. Always told people this too. That everybody that committed a murder got life without parole, I wouldn't have no problem. I mean, look, that is everybody that kills somebody got life without parole. But that's not true. And Steve said it earlier. There are people in prison who didn't kill anybody. I mean, they offered me a deal to plead guilty to 8 to 20 years to murder. I'm saying, hold it, how the hell can I be guilty of murder when I ain't killed nobody? I just couldn't reconcile that in my brain. But people think that when you got lifer that you actually killed someone. And so we just got to educate ourselves. We got to tell that story that everybody in prison is not a murderer. We just got some screwed up laws. And Pennsylvania is unique in the country. A lot of people don't understand. They think, oh, down south, Alabama, Texas. No, Pennsylvania is one of the worst. This is the only state that give out life without parole for 2 degrees of murder. So the prosecutor, just to give you an example, the prosecutor had 2 bites at the apple. I promise you, I don't care what the crime is. The prosecutor never argues second-degree murder. Never. Nobody argues for a first-degree conviction. And even if the jury says, I don't think this guy should spend the rest of his life in prison, I'm going to find him guilty of something less, we'll find him guilty of second degree. They assume that second degree is left, and the prosecutor, he wins. But you still get a mandatory life without parole sentence. Whether the jury finds you guilty of first or guilty of second. Doesn't matter.
There are mics up there, and if you want to ask a question, there's one there, there's one there. If you can't get to the mic, raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Okay.
Thank you so much for the panel. My name is Tomiko, and my former training is a cultural anthropologist, and I lead the organization Aging People in Prison Human Rights. We work to get elderly people out of prison, and I work along with Ellen, who runs the chapter here. I came down today from Baltimore, and I went to the museum, Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I saw the exhibit where they had the women and men, lifers, incarcerated, and I was just so overwhelmed by all the photos, the pictures. They all had children. So many children left behind. And I wonder, as anthropologists, just do we as a society understand just how dysfunctional we are as far as allowing so many people to be in prison, so many prisons spread across the United States, and most of these people are people of African descent. And so I wonder, when do we begin to push the conversation where it's not normal, where I have to go to prison 30, 40 years to change, to become a better person? When do we begin to push to have alternatives and diversions to incarceration, to imprisonment. Because to have children growing up with so many people incarcerated, their parents is like a child growing up in a war-torn country. This is what we are at this point. And I wonder with the law students in here, do they understand not just man-made law, but also moral law? If those two laws aren't in sync, that is injustice. And how do we begin to retrain them to understand that they have work to do as far as we got to push the culture to change the way of thinking? When do we begin to push that conversation where we have to begin to change the culture, society, talk about diversions, talk about alternatives, we actually begin to live with one another and not apart?
I think you need an answer to that one. The statement right there, absolutely. We need to change the whole paradigm. But unfortunately, a lot of our law students from this school and other schools, they are going to fall right into the culture. It's a competitive culture. They might graduate, they get a job in DA's office, and they get sucked into that mindset. And I wish I had the answer for that one.
I don't think it's necessarily something that we should depend on law students to make this change happen. I mean, my 16-year-old son came downstairs the other day after doing some homework about comparing and contrasting two philosophers. I said, so what did you come up with? And he said, prisons aren't the answer. I was like, all right, right on. So I don't think we have to depend on law students for that. Just education, consciousness. I think it's possible.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Hi.
Go ahead, honey. Go ahead. Good evening. My name is Knesset Klein. 30 years of prison rights advocate with Pennsylvania Prison Society and different groups. First of all, I'm really proud of Steve and Tyrone and Wayne Jacobs and others that have did so much work all these years. I got a chance to meet these guys through the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and Steve was already out, and we worked together. But Tyrone was inside still organizing things, and thanks to Joan Porter and Julia Hall, they would let us come in and be able to do programs and work with them. But I really believe at this time, this governor that we have now is the closest anywhere that I've seen to Governor Schaap. And I think we really need to get some information to him and see if his heart can go where our hearts is and get some things changed, because he's going to be out soon, just like someone else will come in. And I really believe his heart is in the right place, and we can get to him with some information like the Schaap administration. This year, one of my prayers was answered, and I saw juvenile lifers come home. I have a group called Juvenile Lifers Project I had put together, and a lot of the juvenile lifers were able to come home, and at the Prison Society every month we were able to talk things over, what they want to do. We have a mentoring program at the Prison Society at Graterford and at Chester, so men can be mentored. You know, they can't just get out like McFadden. You know, they can get mentored and find out where these people are, you know. But seeing these guys come home, who I left in the Youth Study Center when I was a kid. I was locked up for a gun and stolen car. And I was able to come home and finish school. These guys just came home 45 years, you know. And so the last 30 years, my heart was into juvenile lifers and trying to get commutation and laws changed for that. And I want to thank the Prison Society, Ms. Claire, who's taken over, and all those that were part of it, Steve and Tyrone and those guys for setting the groundwork. And I really thank God for you guys. Thank you. I have a son and a grandson that are here with me today, and they're actually looking, you know, following, you know, just to see what I was into all these years, you know, and that's something good. They want to be able to be a part of this. Thank you.
And we appreciate your work too, brother. Really do. Thank you. Many years you put in.
Hello, my name is Teresa Reed, and I'm the sister of Giovanni Reed, who's a juvenile lifer. He did 26 years for a murder that he did not commit. And growing up, and I think for other people too, looking at people in jail, you know they did something bad. Then to look at a lifer, that's like, oh, you know, like it's really scary. But until we don't understand it, but until it happened to me, and I knew my brother was a good person, you know, he was just a good person. So I know, just like him being a good person, other lifers, good people too. Things happen to good people also. So we look at them like bad guys, but you can't really judge everybody. And I have never been to a prison to visit anyone in 26 years. Well, all my life. If you in jail, don't call me. I'm not giving you a visit or nothing. But when my brother was in jail, he could count on a visit. Once a week, twice a week. And when he got close to his release, every week I was there. And I'm glad that he home.
Me
Thank
too.
you.
Hi everybody, how you feeling?
Okay.
Okay, so my name is Gigi. I don't know if I have a question more so than a couple of statements, and I'll try to make it brief. First, I want to thank the gentleman in the orange blazer over there for sharing the work that he's doing with the mentoring program. So I definitely will be talking to you before the night is over. Hi. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for sharing. One of the things that you said, Mr. Tyrone, is you talked about just because the person has the title of a lifer, it doesn't mean that they've murdered someone, you know. And a lot of times when we hear that someone is serving life, and by the way, I have a brother in Graterford Prison, Malik Miller, and he's a lifer. He was arrested at the age of 19, so he was no longer considered a juvenile, and he's been in there for a very long time. But anyway, one of the things, when you hear of someone being a lifer, a lot of times you said, well, it was a homicide. You know, they murdered someone. You know, why should we have sympathy for them? Okay, and I think a lot of it is education too, but it wasn't. For me, maybe a couple of years ago, I came across a program where people could actually be pen pals, which I don't think they really do anymore, but you could be pen pals with a person who was incarcerated. And they would give the person's name, where they were incarcerated, and also how many years they were serving. And some of the people there were serving 30 years, 20 years, and their offense was selling drugs. You know, and maybe they didn't have the title of a lifer, but I'm thinking that if you're in prison for 30 years and you're arrested in your early 20s or something like that, then that is a bulk of your life, and it's not right. And so it is a system that is broke and corrupted. And so all this to say is that I think that I definitely want to be a part of the process of educating and correcting this. People deserve a second chance when they do the work on the inside to get themselves right, when they evolve and when they grow, to be an asset to the rest, to us all. So, like I said, I didn't have questions. I just wanted to say some things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Paul Heaton. I'm one of Regina's colleagues on the faculty here at the law school. So I have a question about the process for commutation. So as I've thought about this, when the board is trying to make a decision, we often get statements from the individual involved and the offender and maybe family and the victim, and talk to correctional officers. You know, one of the things that I thought was very interesting in your comments today, as you mentioned, well, hey, Reginald McFadden, all the other inmates kind of knew that wasn't really a very good guy that you'd want to release. And one of the things that's been striking to me is, in thinking about who probably has the best information for understanding who's changed, I would imagine it's probably the people who are spending the time every day around this person. So my question is, do you feel like the other inmates ought to have a voice in the process? Is there enough of a voice? Are there things that we could change about that process that would realistically enable, the other inmates to be involved in some way and provide information?
That's an excellent idea. However, unfortunately, the powers that be would not give us the respect to make a decision like that, or giving us that kind of authority or power. Because I think one of the elements of the incarceration is to emasculate. That's too much like being a citizen, so to speak. In fact, my colleague Wayne Jacobs, we run an organization, Ex-Offenders for Community Empowerment, and one way to get Wayne the hair to stand up on his neck is to call somebody a returning citizen. His statement is formally convicted, because don't call me a citizen unless you're going to give me my rights as a citizen, right? If you're going to deny me employment, if my criminal background is going to prevent me from getting a job or get housing or other benefits, don't call me no citizen until you give me all my rights back, okay? And a few times they try to take the vote away, okay? So, your point should be taken. There should be some kind of inmate council or something that if a person was going for commutation, that they have to get that endorsement. Not saying if it would mean much, but because that can get politicized too. But that's a great idea, and it's something we talked about before. That you should get if you can't get endorsement from your peers, what's going on here?
Yeah, actually, they talked about that was when they changed the Constitution. That was one of the things they're going to talk to guards, like on the down low, not like a council or anything, but just talk to guys randomly and say, "What do you think about this?" They never did it because that was give us too much dignity. But I'm sitting here like really irked and painful every time people say this word, inmate. I really hate that word. I don't think we should refer to people who are incarcerated as inmates. It's very dehumanizing. It is very, very dehumanizing. I mean, the whole time I was incarcerated, I never referred to myself or any other person incarcerated as an inmate, because you don't understand, because it's othering, like them, the inmates, and it's dehumanizing. So can we go forward and just say people, incarcerated people, not inmate? That is a horrible term. I really, really hate it. It's just like every time somebody says it's like a stab in my heart, because of I know what dehumanization does to individuals. Even when you're trying to advocate for them, and when you call them inmate, it's almost like they're less than, they're other than this other deal, those people over there. And actually, when they're part of our community, I have the opportunity to meet people from around the world. And when I talk about their criminal justice system, I am stunned at the fact that they talk about how they see people who are incarcerated as part of the community and how society has failed them. It's just the reverse in this country. We see people who are in prison as not part of the community, that is their fault, irrespective of the structural and systemic causes of crime in our community. So hopefully that we all can agree that the word inmate is othering and really, really dehumanizes to men and women who are incarcerated in this country. Thank you very much.
Well, with the Women Lifers Resume Project, if you go on that website, you'll see at least 75 women's resumes of how they've been involved in their incarceration, what they've been doing with their time. So, women can write letters of support for someone's commutation. I don't know how much the Board of Pardons, puts so much weight on that. But a lot of the programming and groups and opportunities that they can take advantage of, I have a feeling is done because of recommendations by other women who are successful in those programs. So indirectly, they do help each other get to that point where they are rehabilitated or they're self-rehabilitated, and that will reflect on their commutation application. But direct support or recommendation for a commutation to the Board of Pardons, I don't think they're interested in that. But if you look at it in a more subtle way, that does happen. You know, they do encourage each other, and they do successful programs, and they create programs themselves, and women are behind them on that, and the staff gets behind them on that, and that helps to create a better person and somebody who's hopefully likely to get commuted. So it happens, but not really outward.
And plus, you never really know, because I know a lot of guys wrote letters for me when I went off commutation. I mean, I don't know what weight it held, but they did it. Maybe they did take that into consideration. I don't know. They would never tell you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm John O'Brien. I want to thank Pastor Klein for inviting me tonight. This is my first introduction to this type of setting. However, I spent 15 to 30 years in prison as a result of a nonviolent crime. And although I wasn't a lifer, it felt like my life was taken from me. And, you know, I was the black sheep of my family. My entire family is in politics in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and have been for a very long time. And what I really wanted to say was that my past does not define me, because every day I have the opportunity to make a new past. That's right. And that I'm no longer a number, I'm a free man, and I have the freedom of choice. And a lot of times, people who are incarcerated without rehabilitation, paradoxically, that's a straight, mainstream way to create recidivism in the system, because they're just warehousing inmates, and then they're releasing them, if they get released, without rehabilitation and without, when I went away, for example, they had Atari and Commodore 64s, and when I came home, they had cell phones and talking cars. Socially, I was inept. Not to mention the fact that it was a culture shock. So there are so many different ways that we can reach these inmates and educate them, not only on our culture and how it's changed, but on society and its mainstream, because they're incarcerated for so long that they come home and they're unaware of everything that's going around them. I know that for me, it took me months to not walk on the right side, not stand at a door and wait for someone to open it for me. It was a very tough adaptation, but that being said, I believe that the fact that the victim is a member of that 5-person panel.
Victim's advocate.
It's a victim's advocate. It's not the victim itself.
Victim's advocate.
Okay, so they're not aware of anything other than the crime that was committed. They don't have any type of information on what he's done while he's incarcerated?
Oh, yes, they have.
Or they do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they
My
have
misunderstanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think we have to do more to explain what the process is, and we'll have to, we've tried to get someone from the DOC to do that, and we hope to do that maybe in one of the next series of videos that we'll be working on, so that people have some better understanding of how complicated it is.
It's a very tough process, and right now, when you put it up there, I know guys that filed 5 years ago, the application still hasn't been heard, because they had this huge backlog, and you got it's a lot of interview process, and like I mean, I think the video kind of explained it all. They do all these investigations to your background, to the crime, school. They do. It's a really grueling, intensive process. And after '95, when they changed the Constitution, anybody that filed an application who gets when you file an application, you got to file it. They do what they need to do the investigation, and then they package it up. You get interviewed by the psychologist, and this process inside the Department of Corrections, where they put together a package of information, and they send it to the DOC. The DOC writes a recommendation for or against. Then they send it to the Pardons Board. The Pardons Board do their investigation, look at everything, and then when the time they have a merit review hearing, that means the 5 members meet. They allegedly read the file. Nobody really knows they really read the file or not. They may have a staff person who reads it, and then they take a vote on whether to grant a person a public hearing. Right. And you need 3 people to get a public hearing. Rarely does anyone get the 3 votes to get a public hearing. But if you do get the 3 votes to get a public hearing, the person who filed the application has to be in it. One of the changes in the Constitution, which is a good change. It says that before any life is commuted, they must be interviewed by the 5 members of the board. Now that was a good change, because if you do get that opportunity, it presents itself with the opportunity for you to really sell yourself in front of the board. And then the next day, they'll hold your public hearing, which you do not attend. So the public hearing is held in your absence. You have someone who represents you before the board. You can use the DOC person, who is Mr. Burke, or you can get your own person, a lawyer, or anybody from the community can represent you before the board. My brother represented me, a lawyer represented Steve, and then the other side, it's something like a courtroom. Then the other side is represented by the district attorney from that county. Lately, the district attorney has not been showing up. They just write a letter and send it up. So you make your presentation. You have 15 minutes to make the presentation. The board can ask questions if they want. And after the 15 minutes, you can get people speak for you and all that kind of stuff. They go into executive session and they discuss the case, and they come back out and they take a vote in public. If you don't get all 5 votes, your application is denied, and you are notified that your application is denied, and then you have to wait 2 years. Or you can file, successive, you can file again immediately, but if you get turned down a second time, you gotta wait 2 years, which really turns into about 8 years, because it takes 4 years just for them to hear your application.
We're going to have to end, so if we could just get comments from the 2 people who haven't spoken, and then Wayne?
All right. Wayne Jacobs, ex-offenders for community empowerment and a formerly convicted person. Steve, your situation is really unique in a way.
Right.
Simply because of the fact that most times a person who comes up for commutation has to be there for at least 20 years. That's the minimum, right? And just wondering, because there's a lot of families here who have loved ones incarcerated, and I think they need to hear, in terms of, we heard what goes on inside the jail in terms of how the board operate, but have not heard, that community input. What can the family do in terms of helping line up the ducks? Like I like to use my phrase of lining up the ducks correctly, making sure that all of them are straight. So this way, when you do go for that hearing, you cover all the bases. So I'm just wondering if you can go through some of that for people here who want to help their loved ones and really don't know what to do, and maybe you can somewhat guide them in terms of that.
Like you mentioned, it was almost a miracle to get out, to be granted commutation after 14 years. But, my opinion was I shouldn't have got convicted in the first place, but that's another story, But to Wayne's point, and also what Tyrone was speaking on, the process is so gruesome. First of all, you have to paint a picture on paper and convince the government that you are worthy of mercy, and you have to put this in writing. And I challenge any Penn student or any other college student to be able to, you got to be damn near William Shakespeare, you know, to make this point, you know, and then take this in consideration that maybe 80% of the prison population is illiterate. So basically that process is denied them. You know, fortunately, I was able to read and write when I went to jail. You know, but that part of the process is ridiculous. Yeah, but to Wayne's point is the board. One of the things they look for is they look for remorse. They look for you accepting responsibility, and they also look as will you reoffend, or what role are you going to play when you get back in society. So the more you can demonstrate the support on the outside, family members. Now, you know, families want their loved ones home, but there's work that they can do. Not only just the writing and things like that, but find ways to help your loved one have an impact on the outside. Now, if that lifer has children, that family needs to help that family, that incarcerated person, to maintain those contacts with their children. Family is probably the most important element in rehabilitation anyway, or not just rehabilitation, in anybody's life, okay, that makes us better people. Okay, so keeping those family connections, and to have people, even before you go to a board, if you have other people that can attest to your character. You know, in my situation, now I'm Muslim by faith, but I had Catholic priests and everybody, you know, hey look, because you know my folks were Catholic, and to show what kind of, you have to show what kind of individual you are. You know, life didn't start in the prison. Okay, so we all have made some kind of positive social connections in our lives, so we have to build on those things. And for the men in the prison, they need, like Wayne said, you got to line up your ducks, so to speak. And what he means by that is you have to put the work in. You know, you have to be on a road of self-development, educationally, morally, and socially, to make a case for yourself. And because if you think it's just going to manipulate that paper and do that application, just fill in the dots, it's not that kind of ball game at all.
No, he's right. Can I just say something real quick? I helped a handful of women, about 7 women, write their applications by looking at the work that Dr. Brown from University of Penn has been doing with lifers at Graterford. So I tried to mimic kind of what her students were doing by buying Thurman Berry's application online from some college website. And family often needs to be recruited to help the person remember what their life was like 30, 40 years ago, names of relatives, where they lived, what schools they attended, where they're going to live next, you know, how they're going to live when they get out. I mean, the family needs to be there at the very beginning of the application process. It, you know, a couple of hours. It's not like, you know, like, it's not like, you know, you're going to spend a whole year working on this, but, you know, a few hours, you're no, I'm just saying, a meeting with the family. Well, yeah, but I don't know why that is, but to have a family meeting and just go, oh, look at the application and look at look what the person has already written, fill in some of the blanks. They forget things after 30 or 40 years, and, you know, Dr. Brown's classes create this nice flow of information and a timeline, because it's faster to read and you're not reading sentences, and boom, 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 you get all the information from the family and the schools, and people forget these things. And so a family can help put that picture together better, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah, but actually, it took me 2 years to write.
Did it?
Yeah, because you really got to go inside.
I get that.
And,
Yes.
You got to be like really. You got to be really in tune with yourself to be able to write that. But like Steve said, you got to paint a picture. You had to really paint a picture because yours is being judged on paper.
Yeah.
I mean, the interview process helps, fosters that. But anyone here who has a person that's serving life and who wants to write an application for commutation, they really got to understand what taking responsibility is. I mean, that is key. In the 80s, we used to send volunteers up to the commutation hearings. Was in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, you automatically got a hearing. And I would read these guys' application, and it was beautifully written. But the board would say, this guy is not taking responsibility. Application after application. And I said, like, it sounds good to me. Like, I'm sorry, I did it. And I had to find out what does taking responsibility means. And I talked to a victim advocate, and she said, when you take responsibility, there is no but. Right? There is no but. So you got to talk to your loved ones, or anybody's gonna file, that you can't say something like, yeah, I did it, I'm sorry and everything, but I was hanging out with the wrong crowd. Or, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm very remorseful, I did it, I participated in this crime, oh, I'm so sorry, but see, I was abused when I was a child. You know what I mean? That but kind of negates any responsibility that you take. So,
Well, I think it's important to.
well, I'm just saying what the board, so you
Right,
got to
right.
see,
But-
a lot of women got a lot of circumstances
Yeah.
where postpartum depression, abuse, they manipulated.
So
by
the
some
story
man
leading
or
up to the
drug.
crime is as important as the crime
Yeah, right.
itself.
I'm just telling you what the board how they look at it. Yeah. Don't beat me up. I mean,
I know, that's cool. No, that's all right.
So, yeah.
Well,
last comment.
Last comment.
Muhammad.
Good afternoon. Good evening. My name is Richard Tut Carter. I'm with the Human Rights
He's a fine,
Coalition
upstanding gentleman.
and Pennsylvania Veterans Justice Project. I'm gonna talk about y'all. I just want to take a few seconds to ask that you explain to us, or just give us some type of rendition of how your days are spent in prison. When I first came to Graterford, one of the first person I met was Steve. And Steve was the principal of the school that we had in the masjid at Graterford Prison. Some people that come to prison, he said 85% of the prison is illiterate. So sometimes people are ashamed to go to the school system. So if they were Muslims or they was a part of our faith, we had our own school system. So I want Steve, the young lady here, and Tyrone to talk about what it is that you do to make a contribution to other people, because it's your contribution that served me, served Wayne, and served the whole population. And I'm hearing it, but I'm not hearing it in terms that these people here can actually say, I want to support a lifer because lifers are doing such great things to rehabilitate people who nobody else can rehabilitate.
I didn't know that was my responsibility tonight. But what do we do specifically?
Or what do the lifers do?
Yeah.
I think it's
When you
what-
get up in the morning, after you go have your coffee, after you
Lifers
had your
do.
breakfast, and you're walking back to the block and you're talking to somebody who's with you, who's not on the same level you are, what do you say to these people?
What do the lifers do for each other, I think, is basically.
Well, I've never been in prison myself, so I can't fathom that scenario personally. But I can say that all lifers, hands down, are the heart of the institution. And I hate saying that because Wetzel said that in some documentary or TEDx or whatever. But they definitely hold the institution together. And it gets to the point where they get almost burnt out, frankly, of constantly being called on to help facilitate or help run a program or deal with a conflict, or, after a while, after 30, 40, 50 years of being called on to do that, it's kind of hard to sustain that. So, you have to work with the younger lifers who will work on doing that. But they definitely are the institution would fall apart without what the lifers do. Correct. Yes.
Yeah, don't say that because there's no reason to let people out. Stabilize the prison, right?
Well, they can pay us for it.
Yeah, they'll pay for it, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for sticking through the program. We will have the video up. We will probably have this Q&A up so that you can share it with other people, or if you want to hear it again, we'll hear it again. But please look at the back of the program, and if you do nothing else, go to the change.org petition, visit the Lifers webpage, and give the information to other people so that they can do it too. Thank you all, and thank the panel.
No, thank you, Regina, for.
Thank you.